Thanks to our Patreon members for helping to make this episode possible, and we're now available on all the major podcasting platforms. You can find more information at the links below. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a new read-along series, and this time, by request of my most recent class here in France, I asked them what they thought we should do next. I figure this is a group project. We do it together. And they decided they would like to hear Beyond Good and Evil. So I'm not sure we'll do the entire book. It is a bit longish. Not longish, it's as long as it is. But we'll do several big chunks of it. And this is an introduction, and I won't go into the actual text itself because I want to give you a chance to get the book and to read up, and so that you'll be prepared for next time when we'll jump into the first couple of sections. How you break up Beyond Good and Evil, that's a question. You'll see the challenge when you begin reading it yourself if you haven't already looked at this work. But I did want to give a framing lecture just to set out briefly what is going on in Beyond Good and Evil, why it's an important work, and where it fits within Nietzsche's sort of overall works. First, it was written after Thus Spake Zarathustra. Nietzsche himself considered Thus Spake Zarathustra to be one of his most significant, if not most significant works. But if you read Thus Spake Zarathustra, you'll recognize, it's a different kind of work, right? It's not a traditional philosophical argument or construction in any way. And so it's a series of parables and stories and tales over 4 books, actually, which people tend to think mostly of the first book, but there are 4 of them, and it's important to note that whole cycle, whole different subject to explore there. One of what's clearly in part going on in Beyond Good and Evil is that many of the ideas that he discovered, explored, raised, recognized in Thus Spake Zarathustra, he returns to and is more systematic in his presentation of this. And now systematic, again, if you've read Beyond Good and Evil, or if you join me on this trip and begin reading it, you'll think, what is Wes talking about when he says systematic? Because it doesn't read as a systematic work. What I mean is that the paragraph to paragraph, section to section does not seem to lay out a clear argument. However, the totality of what Nietzsche is trying to accomplish in Beyond Good and Evil, which is to clear away all the underbrush so he can establish an entirely new ethical system. This is, I mean, if that's a system, then yeah, he's driving towards that, and this is a crucial understanding of what he's doing. He's got the ideas, he's laid them out, he's discovered them in Thus Spake Zarathustra, and now he's re-articulating them, expanding them, and kind of pressing them to their limits. A couple of notes here, though. To qualify that, I got a lot. It's very qualified. I'll qualify it a little more, which is the notion that Nietzsche is making fully developed, thought-out, edited arguments, I think is inaccurate in most of his works. Not in all of his works, but in many of his works. I think it's pretty clear that he discovered as he went along, that he kind of argued his beliefs into life, and then he would throw them out, edit them, contrast them, argue against them. And so his was a discovery process. And so one of the things that happens when you read Nietzsche is you kind of get to discover along with him. And it's not that he didn't go back through and re-edit. He did all of that. But he was not he didn't have a clear, committed, absolute idea that he then just articulated and elaborated. And I'm sure we've all read those books where you read the introduction and you realize that the next 300 pages is simply an expansion and argue against, or an argument in favor of, and an evidence deployed in favor of, and all of the 1 or 2 ideas that are presented in the introduction. And you go, okay, well, now I understand what's going on. I see it's more fully realized. Nietzsche kind of works differently, in which he kind of asks you to be a fellow traveler with him and explore, experience, discover the ideas in the way that he did. And so it is more of a presentation of discovery of philosophical concepts than a sustained argument from, I already know what's right, and now I'm going to elaborate out from that. And it's more of an experience of the possibility of what philosophy can be and how it can be argued and what can be done, that actually, in many ways, and importantly in Beyond Good and Evil, performs many of the concepts that are actually raised within the text. So it's a different kind of text, but it doesn't mean he doesn't have a system or that he's not a systematic thinker. He is. However, part of his system is to invite discovery. It's an invitation to travel with him, not a here's a truth, which I will elaborate. And of course, you'll see why this is true in the opening of Beyond Good and Evil, which starts very much right at that point and says, no, we're not going to do that. But it's important just to understand in the arc of his work. 3 of the places that I read when I was brushing up on this, because I hadn't read it for a while, so I thought I'd revisit and reread, mention that this is a stepping stone to the will to power. And I was surprised that this idea is still around, because Nietzsche never finished The Will to Power. The Will to Power was published posthumously, and it was cobbled together from his notes, from his writings, by his sister, who was really an impressively, not good person. I mean, she was a Nazi of the first water. She wanted to capture Nietzsche's ideas for the Nazi Party, and so on and so forth. And so, in fact, a lot of the association that Nietzsche still has, despite all the work by scholars, including Kaufman and many others, to try and say, hey, look, this is mostly the damage done to his reputation by his sister to try to associate him with fascism and all of this. And yet I still saw some articles and introductions and stuff that said, hey, no, this is what's going on, that, this is a first step to his most important work, these kinds of arguments that you'll see, that to Will to Power. Will to Power is a book that Nietzsche was working on. These concepts do exist, but in that format, the way they're presented, no, that's not Nietzsche. But that the notion of will to power is important, as we will see in Thus Spake Zarathustra. But what he's trying to establish here is a new way of conceptualizing how we do philosophy, how we think about ethics, how we kind of reorient the way we approach this. And in doing this, he completely, even today, so I just can't imagine reading this book in the 1880s because it's still hard to process. Not because, and this is a note I've made before about Nietzsche and some other philosophers, it's not that his arguments are hard. I think Socrates falls into this category often. It's that what he's arguing is hard. So Nietzsche argues so consistently against our preconceptions that it makes it difficult for us to accept the points that he's trying to make. And so, you go, oh, wait, no. So for instance, just, spoiler alert, one of the things he argues against functionally is universal ethics. He's like, why universal? Like, we don't need universality. We don't need that kind of coherence. Different people, different groups, different periods can have different ethics, and that's fine. This is not problematic in any way, which, of course, is a huge divergence from the notion of people say, oh, we should achieve, say, justice. And the idea is that there is in the universe, hello, Plato, a thing called justice, and that we get varying degrees of closeness to justice, or we're very far apart from justice, but there is a fixed thing somewhere in the great beyond that is justice, and then we're just always comparing ourselves back to that. And Nietzsche's like, no, you can just forget that. However, this is different from relativism, which we'll get into as we hit these passages. But people go, oh, well, this is just moral relativism. It's like, no, this is not what Nietzsche's talking about either. And notice how frustrating that is, because we know about truth and we know about moral relativism. We don't understand that there could be other things. And this is 140 years now after Beyond Good and Evil and these arguments were published. And so you see, like, wow, it's 140 years later. We're still trapped in the same place that Nietzsche was trying to free us from, I guess. Detrap sounds terrible. Let's go with free. He was trying to free us from this sort of binary kind of oubliette that we had found ourselves in, and we just won't have it. He sends down a rope and we throw it back at him. He puts a ladder down and we chop it up into pieces, right? He's like, no, we do not want to climb out. We're very happy in our little pit here. Don't try and rescue us. That's, as far as I can tell, that's what much of philosophy has been doing for the intervening 140 years. It's kind of shocking, and you'll see why as we dig through this work. So that sort of, I'd say, in the scope of his work, he's just finished, again, Thus Spake Zarathustra, the 4 works, and the next thing he really works on, or one of the next things, is this Beyond Good and Evil, and it is a really impressively, I want to say difficult work. It's a challenging work. I guess that's really the work. It challenges so much of what we want to take for granted about things, that, and the way we think and the way the world is and the way philosophy is, and he just is pushing back on that systematically throughout the work. And it's so hard to process. It's so hard to actually get it inside of our heads that it's a fairly straightforward work. It's not a lot of tricks or linguistic subtleties or all of this. It's not. I mean, he's a great writer, but he's not doing it in that way. It's not like the Kant problem, but it's still a bit of a challenge. So fortunately, what he's done is he's broken it up into a whole series of relatively short sections, sometimes half a page, sometimes a few pages, but usually about half a page or so of, you can't really call them arguments. I would say most of them are simply observations. And so he's giving you a whole series of observations. And so as you prepare to read this work, I would suggest, as a way of approaching it, although approach it however you want, but I think a helpful way is to don't think of these as arguments. Think of them as presentations, observations, experiences, and ask first, not is this right or wrong? Of course, Beyond Good and Evil is asking us not to do that anyway, it's right in the title, but asking us to stop for a moment and go, oh, have I had this experience? Does this resonate with me? Can I think of examples where, oh yeah, this does seem like an accurate observation? This is the kind of starting point he wants us to take, not whether this is offensive or inoffensive or it seems crazy or seems wrong. It's like, oh, have you seen this? Does this observation seem to be relevant? And if it is, then the kinds of things he dreams up with these observations become sort of significant. If not, if you go, well, that's just crazy, that doesn't apply anymore, that maybe was true 140 years ago, but it has no merit today, then you can just, skip right on over it. But as I think you'll see, this is generally not the case. So that, with those caveats, I would invite you to sit down and read the first few, 5 or 6 sections of not Thus Spake Zarathustra, but of Beyond Good and Evil, and just prepare yourself for a very different kind of journey. And a final comment on this, I would argue, is that I find it a quite enjoyable read. As someone who reads a lot of philosophy, just his process of writing, and if you can find a good translation, Kaufman has a nice translation, if I remember correctly. You can look around. I don't like to get into the weeds about who should translate what. There's free translations available because some of them have gone out of copyright, so they're available online. You can find the PDFs for this. But his style and his sort of more conversational presentation of what he's doing, I think, is engaging. But that is the one trick, I would say. Be careful, because part of his engagement, part of the facility of this, is that he is going somewhere. We'll find this out. Like, this is not a directionless, random collection of thoughts that's been ordered in no particular fashion. Despite the seeming surface level that this is sort of a loosely grouped bunch of thoughts and reflection, he is walking us to a place. We are on a journey with him, and he wants us to arrive someplace. And whether that's a good place to arrive or not, We'll just have to decide as we move along. And whether we should even judge it as good or evil, of course, he's going to say no, because the whole purpose of the book is beyond good and evil. And so, quick introduction, invitation for you to join Nietzsche, an invitation to join Nietzsche with a long conversation, a long reflection on the many ideas, the many crazy insights, the wild observations that Nietzsche rolls out in this pretty much the last complete work he wrote before he went a bit crazy and had to be institutionalized towards the end of his life. So, an invitation to beyond good and evil. Thank you very much.